Hello, everyone, and welcome. On behalf of the InterX team, thank you for joining us today for our webinar. What does patient-centric innovation look like in precision medicine? This is part of the InterX clinical development conversations, where we bring together industry leaders to share perspectives on challenges and opportunities shaping the clinical development today. Before we begin, I'd like to show a brief video about InterX and our approach to clinical research.
Clinical research has long promised hope to patients. Yet for many sponsors, the path from protocol to patient has become slower, more complex, and increasingly disconnected from real care. InRx was not born in a boardroom. It was built from inside healthcare. Backed by the SRM Group, we saw where the system was falling short. India, home to extraordinary clinicians, investigators, and patients, has historically been underrepresented in global clinical research. We believe that needed to change. We built a next-generation CRO to increase sponsor value while expanding access for underserved patients. Led in the United States, with clinical execution embedded within India's healthcare system, delivering white glove service to sponsors and offering patients access to a higher standard of care than they might otherwise receive. For sponsors, this means faster startup, predictable execution, and regulatory-ready data. For patients, it means access, care, and hope. At InRx, clinical trials aren't transactions. They're commitments. InRx, simplifying trials, accelerating cures. Clinical.
And now I'm very pleased to welcome Dr. Amy Sehnert. Amy is the Chief Medical Officer at Thryv Therapeutics, where she leads the development of innovative cardiovascular therapies. She's a physician scientist and executive leader with more than 20 years of experience advancing novel medicines through clinical development, regulatory approval, and commercialization. Previously, Amy held senior leadership roles at Bristol Myers Squibb, leading global cardiovascular programs. She's passionate about translating scientific innovation into meaningful patient outcomes. Amy, thank you for joining us. It's great to have you here.
Thanks, Greg. It's great to be here.
And before we get into the conversation, I encourage everyone to submit questions for Amy at any time using the Q&A feature, and we'll save time at the end to answer as many questions as we can. So Amy, let's get started. First, I'd like to ask you, what lessons have you learned developing first-in-class therapies that every biotech leader should know?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think tackling first-in-class, the first lesson it teaches you is to be very humble. It's the type of person who gravitates toward first-in-class opportunities, accepts the risk and challenge of doing so, embarking on something that is new, something that might be addressing a rare condition or a condition that really hasn't seen a lot of advances in the clinical research realm. And so it requires a lot of resilience, collaboration, creativity, and coming with a very solution-oriented mindset. I think another major lesson learned is how much communication it involves, communication and education. There's a lot of stakeholders around the table, and as you're embarking on a first-in-class opportunity, it requires educating around the scientific grounding that you're bringing forward, the body of evidence that you're launching, which is inevitably less than you might have with an iteration of something that's been known before. So that involves stakeholders, on the regulatory side. in the clinical realm with physicians and of course with patients who are going to go on that journey with you and be part of that first. So for the many teams I've worked with, they've heard me say, the first time we do this is the first time for everyone here around the table. And so it is really a process of teamwork and all kind of linking arms and going forward together. You're going to hit bumps in the road. Everyone does. And I think that ability to talk through that, work through that, and get over each of those hurdles together is the best path forward.
Thank you. Yeah, it's definitely a lot of aspects to it and a lot of pioneering, right? You're the first to do these things and no one's ever done them before. Um, would would you have any recommendations for someone that is starting out to do some of these types of trials? Um, you talk about a solution mindset and education. It sounds like it could be harder than many people think. What advice would you have?
Yeah, I think my advice really tracks into what is the basis? Like why what problem are you actually trying to tackle and how are you approaching it with whatever the scientific mechanism of action or background is that that you believe it can solve that problem.
Hmm.
And so and I'm a physician scientist, so I'm very grounded in the very pragmatic basis of understanding that science and connecting it and seeing if it even makes sense. But then putting yourself in the space of understanding the clinical and medical condition and saying, again, what is missing for those patients? What is the unmet need? And really teasing that out to understand where this new approach is going to fit in that. Is it going to replace something else? Is it going to be a brand new thing, or is it going to be added into some standard of care that already exists? So I come to it from, does the science make sense to attack this problem? And then is the problem a real problem? And if we solve it, is that really going to be meaningful in the end of the day to the patients? And also, when you're doing that, because you design trials with outcomes and endpoints, and so you're going to try to show that you're moving the needle on something, you may find yourself creating or having to also understand and design an endpoint that maybe hasn't even been used before. So that's another aspect of matching, the science to the problem. Now I'm fixing the problem. How am I going to measure that? And is that an endpoint and an outcome that's familiar and known? Or is that now an endpoint that in and of itself also needs, some explanation and backing so that, again, regulators, clinicians, scientists, and the patients understand and makes a difference for them.
Yeah. So how do you ensure that the scientific opportunity matches the unmet patient needs?
Well, I think that I mean, I've had the good fortune, and I think if you look at first in class opportunities, they mostly didn't come around yesterday. They could be built on decades of work, and a breakthrough has been made such that it is now something that you could bring forward and translate from the bench into the clinic. So I look for things that fit that narrative that I can go read about and see what that scientific basis is, and then understand the clinical problem. Like I said, sometimes and my experience has been working in rare and inherited diseases that they're not without treatment, but it could be that there's been a long-standing use of a treatment that was never approved for that disease. I also work in cardiovascular, so we borrow therapies, that have been proven in some disease, and as clinicians, we think it might have a mechanism of action or a benefit, but it's not been run through a clinical trial, so they're used off-label, in some way, or also. In cardiovascular, there's devices, so
Hmm.
patients may also be having been treated with devices. But so uh, really taking that science, seeing a niche where there really hasn't been anything prospectively studied and designed to address that disease. And when we say precision medicine, I often think of, again, a biological mechanism of action that's really designed for that disease. I mean, gene therapy is the most specific thing. The gene is wrong, I'm going to replace it. That's very highly precision. But there's many other examples where the scientific underpinnings really match the problem that's going
Hmm.
on in that disease. And so, but understanding the unmet need is really where you need that patient voice to help you understand what are the gaps, what are the limitations of the current standard of care, if any,
Hmm.
and also what age spectrum does it affect? With inherited diseases, they can be present from birth. And so, there's aspects of pediatric care all the way through adult care in a lot of first-in-class opportunities.
Those are all really great points. And when I think of rare disease, I often think of patient advocacy groups. Can you talk a little bit about how
Mhm.
you work with them? Because I see that a lot of those as people searching for a cure and seeing firsthand the debilitating effects some of these conditions have on family members or on themselves. So they decide to become patient advocates. Is there a partnership or a way that you work with them to help?
Yeah, absolutely. Patient advocacy organizations are critical. As you say, they kind of are a centralizing place to support patients and families who are experiencing the disease and the challenges of maybe lacking certain therapies or centralizing a way to help patients get access to the latest innovations that are happening or clinical trials. So for the last 9 years and what I've been doing, and prior to that, even in different spheres, because I've also, really had that genetic basis of disease underpinning in my career in terms of the different diagnostics and therapeutics that I've had the opportunity to work on. And so the advocacy organizations also are critical in help you. A sponsor can help support and advocacy organizations lead externally led patient-focused drug development sessions, with the
Mm.
regulators. And what do? They bring patients to the table to give their stories and to share their lived experiences so that this can be collated into a voice of the patient and really be a great basis to again understand what is the unmet need, what are the limitations of the current therapies, what would be clinically meaningful to the patient. And again, that can come into enormous play when you're then talking about designing endpoints for the regulators to have that patient voice to convince that, gosh, if this felt better, or if I could function better in this way, measured by this test, that would be really meaningful for me. So patient-reported outcomes is another area that is important. It's an important way within a trial or an observational natural history study to gather information again about the journey, the patient journey. What does progression look like? What are the real limiting factors of the disease? So advocacy organizations, I've seen several excellent examples where ELPFDDs have been led. That voice of the patient document is there. And also they can be a source, of course, to enroll studies based on, again, building that awareness, that education around what are clinical trials, what does it
Mm-hmm.
mean to be a clinical trial participant, and to be a source of the latest information of what results are being generated, and how to get ultimate access to a new therapy if it makes it all the way through to the clinic. So
Mm-hmm.
they're really critical, and in my experience, there are obvious ways to work with the advocacy organizations as a sponsor, or even as a roundtable of corporate sponsors that have, they're on distinct paths, but the source to the patients and the questions around the unmet need may be really localized there. They can also be strong partners, with you at just for recruitment, but also at the regulatory table when you're talking about the results of the trial, and again, assigning that clinical meaningfulness back to the patient.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So other than patient advocacy groups, how do you incorporate the patient perspective into like the trial design or the outcomes?
Mhm. Yeah, I'm very pleased to say that I've had steering committees with patient on it,
Wow.
and when that first happened, it really was a wow. It was a first for me. We talk about it, but we did it, and it was first for her. It was a first for most on the committee, and she walked alongside us, and that voice was present, uh, and all along the way, including seeing the trial get conducted, read out, communicated the way we communicate in the professional realm at presentations, at meetings, and publications, etc., but also in writing a layperson directed publication to
Mm.
interpret, to be our interpreter to the patient of what those results really meant, because, some of it just becomes technical and the patients are wondering, well, what does that really mean to me? So just an excellent experience. Other approaches to that are like patient focus groups, where you assemble a group of patients, you've got the protocol, they see the protocol. I like to put a schedule of assessments in front of people and say, do a dry run of this. Imagine yourself showing up for each of these visits, how long you're going to be on site, what is, how you're going to be poked and prodded and run around to, to gather this data and information. And if you do that with patients beforehand, of course, in clinical development, there's some limitations where it's not that patient friendly, and you have to collect that data in that way, for rigor for the trial. But you get a lot of insight and ideas from the patients being able to see that ahead of time, and maybe you can cut a corner, not cut corners, but model it so that it's a little bit more patient friendly. And when we've worked with pediatric population, it's in an example with an adolescent group, we interviewed the adolescents and we did also their parents, and you actually get different feedback from the teenager who's actually going to
Mhm.
be in the trial versus their parent who's supporting them through it, but has different concerns or thoughts about it. So really deliberately getting those perspectives through patient participation. We've also used wearables and or PROs that are completed on, say, an iPad or something. And we sent that to the patients, like, can you do this easily? Like, is this, what do
Mhm.
you think? And so as much feedback like that that you can get from the population before you get going. You don't always have that chance, but uh, in some organizations, you can't pass go unless you take those steps, and that's good. That's the way it should be.
That's great. That's great. Thank you. And I just want to encourage the audience. I see some questions coming in. If you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A. Then I'd like to hear your thoughts on how the burden of patient participation can be reduced
Mhm.
to kind of improve their experience, but also while improving enrollment and retention. So there's the goals of the trial, and then the patient centricity, and how do we make it good for them. So you can tell us a little bit more about how you can see that we can make it a win-win for getting the trial done with the right number of patients and the patients staying in the trial, and really giving the taking the burden of the participation off the patient.
Yeah. Well, patients are people, and they have their health condition, which is the reason that they're participating. But they have families, they have lives and work schedules, and maybe are healthy enough to take time off, et cetera, et cetera. So I think remembering, that they're fitting this in. And already, if they're consenting and interested, um, hopefully there's also that, goal to follow the instructions very carefully and, try to be a good and compliant study subject to the extent that they can be. But coming to it from that, I think, does begin with thinking about where they're going to have to be when. And I've seen different models. Again, in oncology, I saw a lot, you show up at a large health center that's many buildings and hallways and so forth, and a patient navigator would meet them at the entrance, and just help get you to the second floor in building B, to the clinic
Mm-hmm.
where you may need to go. So we talk about white glove service, and I think a patient navigator in person or a patient navigator that can call the patient and just how are you doing? What else, what else came up, or what could we help the study team understand that would make this easier for you? Study coordinators become the patient's best friend during this, right? If it's a good relationship, they come back repeatedly for visits. And I've heard many times from good, strong study coordinators that they even develop relationships over the period of time, that the participant, and that tells me that they're also having that kind of connection with the patient. We all went through the pandemic, and on the other side of that, I will say that we have implemented home health visits. And I honestly would think that would be even more than it is now. There may be different reasons for that, but I think coming to the patient, if that makes sense and if that's doable for the assessments that need to be done, is another way to reduce kind of their burden. Of course, covering the expenses of any travel that's involved, accounting for the time that they're spending, and The latest one I love. I don't know why I didn't think of it before because myself and many of my team members have dogs, but they're like, I had to put my dog in the kennel, so that has an expense. We all know how expensive that is. So I think the accounting, we do our budgets and we do our site budgets and we do our CRO budgets and our own internal budgets, but we really need to put the patient factor in there right up front and saying, what cost of time and value does this have to them, and make sure that the reimbursement for that is fair and accounting for those things that they're giving up in order to participate. So I think the more that the patient feels as they are, which is the key part. You can't do it without them. So, as a key part of the puzzle as possible, and remove as many of those hurdles and find ways, on the unblinded side to have those communications and interactions would be well received.
Those are some great ideas. I really like the thinking about the pet care cost, right? So that someone needs to go get treatment, someone needs to take care of their pet. So it's taking the challenges away from them that
Yeah.
we don't always think of. So I guess one last question as we get to the 30-minute mark here. What would you say is like the secret to building a truly effective partnership across sponsors, CROs, sites, investigators, patients? What have you learned over your years that you think people could benefit from knowing about?
Yeah, there's so many lines of communication. And, when we work remote or we're in this virtual world, um, we see a lot of emails and chat messages and so forth. But I think my point is that communication, it boils down to really good communication and commitment. And I think if if you take yourself out of the box of whatever the role is you have on the study to make sure it gets accomplished and kind of put yourself in the patient's shoes, like why are you doing it in the first place, and thinking about them, showing up for your visits so that that data that you're really waiting for appears. I think because I am a physician, I'm a pediatric trained physician. We are born in advocacy, and thinking and having been in the clinic setting, I can place myself in terms of what that interaction at a clinical site would look like. And I just try to share and transmit that to the team, again, no matter what their role is, that there is another person at the other end of that. Maybe if you say, is that my friend or relative or myself doing that, kind of just up the ante in terms of how you handle the information, the respect you apply to that information, and the rigor, looking at it and being complete in the conduct of the trial. I hope, adds a little more layer than just kind of the rote or redundant or administrative type work that might be involved in the actual clinical trial conduct.
Well, thank you. I can't believe how fast these 30 minutes have gone.
Yeah.
We have some time now for the audience questions, and let me see what's come in here. Okay, so clinical development can sometimes become a series of boxes that get checked. How do teams make sure they're focused on what will actually determine the success of the program?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, being in my role, or ultimately the accountable person's role for the readout of a trial, um, the place where you could lose sleep at night, right, is if those boxes that were checked weren't just kind of haphazardly checked, but really had that thorough attention to detail, and completeness, because the quality of the data and even other various aspects of the trial conduct could could tip the scale on a positive result or not. We're talking about biology and we're talking about a response to a medication. We have placebo arms, for that reason and so forth. But I think that getting sloppy in it or being not, kind of grounded in the why again, can lead to lapses or again a more administrative exercise than something that is really connected to the end game, right? So,
Hmm.
and everybody has a different piece, and it might be a small piece, but I think on teams where I've been involved for whatever that function is, the individual who's really looking at it with their own eyes, raising points that they see. I think that's really important. We maybe
Hmm.
don't even do that enough. We monitor things, but really hearing from all members of the team about things they've seen or observed or might have concerns over or think we should change or, something that needs to be rechecked. That should really be an ongoing process for the whole team to
Hmm.
make it more interesting and hopefully a better outcome, or at least one that you can know that you did your best and that's what the data reveals.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Everyone that's involved, if they see something that they think could be done better or they question, they should raise the points.
Yeah.
Another question just came in and it says, how do you identify these trial coordinators that can engage the patients in the best way possible? As you said, the coordinators sometimes can make all the difference in patient engagement.
Hmm. Another fantastic question. And I think our experience, and I'm sure many people's experience, is this can be a transitionary role for people. Students who may have aspirations to go to medical school or graduate school, and they're at a large academic medical center, and they can get a job as a study coordinator. It can be anything from someone kind of inexperienced to a 20-year veteran who's been, really senior in the role and really loves that, maybe has a nursing or other background and has a different skill. Unfortunately, right, we don't necessarily get to pick the coordinators, but I do think it's an important process to put great thought into as you are doing feasibility with sites and understanding how their coordinators get assigned. Do they have, oftentimes they're taking from a pool of coordinators. And I think another really important thing to do is studies have ebbs and flows. When you're enrolling and you're activating, it's very busy, then it's collecting data, and then you're closing out. And so these can be peaks and valleys, and coordinators are often assigned multiple projects. So as much digging as you can do into how they're selected, who they are, what their other caseload looks like, so that if you start to see time crunch on their end really is what I find repeatedly is the reason for why you might find a coordinator underperforming. They're just buried. And you need to kind of escalate that and dig into that a little bit and with the PI and the organization and see if you can get, others assigned or find a way to offload that coordinator so that, they can be fairly uh, doing the work that you need them to do. It's a very tricky aspect of it that sometimes you don't have a lot of control over. But I think in the feasibility and to the extent you can have that conversation about who the coordinators are going to be, what are their backgrounds, and what do their workloads look like, the sites.
That makes sense. Really getting a good match between what's
Yeah.
needed and what they bring to the table and how available they are. Another question is, you talked a lot about being patient centered, and that's important. but so is a diverse patient population. How do you
Mhm.
balance the two?
Yeah, that's always that's a big challenge because when we generate the data, we often are asked if it's generalizable, to the broader population, and it's not always easy to represent the real broad population in the clinical trial population. And there's some typical things that are done, which is to look at geographies of the site so that have some capture in that community if you're looking to get more representation. There's in the advocacy organizations, I think it draws a certain type of patient. And then there may be patients with the same disease that just aren't active in the advocacy group. And so you kind of want to reach them as well. There can be a gender related thing, cultural, ethnic backgrounds related. And in cardiology, it's been a very male dominated field. And there's papers that have been published. When the PI looks more like the patient, guess what? You mostly get men in cardiovascular, large historic cardiovascular trials. But if you get PIs that look like the patient, they tend to enroll patients that look like them. I love that because honestly, you have to look at what the diversity of the enrolling investigator looks like, and that may come into play. But I've seen a lot of efforts and been part of panels and discussions, and I guess I don't have the perfect answer on that one, except if you don't think about it, it absolutely won't happen. So if
Mhm.
you think about it, you might make a dent in trying to get more representation into your trials. That's more diverse, and really what you're trying to do is generalizable and representative to the disease you're treating and the population that you ultimately could treat.
Makes a lot of sense. I've got another question that came in asking how can we ensure targeted therapies involving innovation are accessible to large patient populations?
Mhm. So well, targeted by nature and precision by nature means that it may be a subset, right, of a larger population. So a certain genotype of a tumor, or like I said, a gene therapy, or truly a precision developed therapy for a smaller indicated population than the common disease. But in terms of overall access, once that succeeds and gets out there, I think it's just the next layer of going out and trying to find those patients in the greater world. And there's any number of barriers to access based on, urban or rural, or being at like an academic medical center versus a private small clinic. And again, I think this is a place where I think medical records and uh, AI methods and patients actually advocating even more for themselves and having ownership on their data and understanding and seeking it would help connect some of those dots. You'll never find me talking about pricing or insurance. So, but I think, again, it's a education. If you've done first in class and now it's a new thing, you're just going to do more of the same. You're just going to educate more and more and more spheres, so that more and more people can be reached. But I do think uh, in an era where patients own their data and have their information compiled together, it would also help find them
Hmm.
in order to get access to that treatment.
That's great. It makes sense. It makes sense. So I have one last question here. Um, Looking across your career, is there one lesson or experience that most changed how you think about putting patients first in clinical development?
Yeah, I do think that having that patient on the steering committee was a real moment of, maybe I've been in industry on the industry side for 20 years and doing things for patients, developing clinical diagnostics or therapeutics for patients. But I'm not in the clinic every day. And, when faced with the patient and the patient voice right there at the table, it was a great reminder. And I think it kind of actually just ramped up from there because it was the involvement with the advocacy groups and these guidelines and aspirations to have patient focus groups review protocols. Before that was kind of like, well, this is our protocol. What do you mean? But getting those patients truly involved and engaged. Because again, on the sponsor side, you're not meeting the patients, you're blinded, you don't know identities and so forth. So that personal interaction with having them involved in the clinical development process in that way brought it home again. So it was really good to interact in that way with patients.
Well, this has been great. I took some notes and I just kind of wanted to review some of the highlights as I wrote them down, and then we can close out. Really, you
Mhm.
started out talking about a solution mindset, the importance of education, asking what problem are we trying to tackle, in engaging patients in the steering committee, and things like a layperson publication, patient focus groups. You talked about the importance of white glove service, patient navigators, covering the cost of putting their pet somewhere while they get treatment. You talked about putting yourself in the patient's shoes, needing thoroughness and attention to detail, not just checking boxes, all team members raising points as they see them, um, putting great thought into how the coordinators get assigned, who they are, what their expertise is, what their other caseload looks like. PIs enrolling patients that look like them. So, looking at a diverse group of investigators can help get diverse patients. And diversity, you said, if you don't think about it, it won't happen. So, really need to pay attention to it. And you also talked about medical records and AI and patients advocating for themselves with their data. Something that will happen in the future. And then the real value of the personal interaction with the patients. I think all of this is just great takeaways for people to think about, and hopefully as they leave this session, they'll continue to think about it, and these things will come up in their day to day. So with that, I want to say, Amy, I want to say thank you. This has been a great conversation. I appreciate you sharing your experience and your perspectives with us today. And thank you to everyone who joined. I hope you found the conversation as valuable as I did. As part of the InterX Clinical Development Conversations, we'll continue bringing together industry leaders for conversations like this, and we'll be announcing our fall session soon. And if there are any topics you'd like us to cover in future conversations, please let us know. You can put it in the Q&A. We'd love to hear from you. And we hope you'll join us again. And I wish everyone a great afternoon. And thank you again, Amy.
You're welcome. Thank you.